It's been 5 years since we saw the last Pure Strike. Yes, the wait has been long, but has it been worth it? Hey everybody, it's Luca from Rackets and Runners. So we know Babolat takes their time to release rackets, and I've said that's a good thing before, but seriously, this one was a little long. I'm pretty sure the last Pure Strike came out in like mid-2019, which means we've been waiting almost half a decade for this one, but we've got it now, and today we're going to be reviewing the Pure Strike 98 1619. We're going to take a look at all of them eventually, but today it's the flagship. Also, I know a lot of you have been asking for a one-handed backhand rackets video. I fell on my left shoulder skiing the other day, and hitting two-handed backhands last session was definitely pretty painful, so I could be making that video out of necessity sooner rather than later. But I'm not kidding when I say my one-handed backhand is shameful. Look at some of these clips. Do you really want that guy telling you which rackets are best for one-handed backhands? Anyways, before we go on, remember that any of the rackets we talk about on this channel you can check out on our website, racketsandrunners.ca. And please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comment section what you want me to cover next. So, after waiting 5 long years for this racket, you would assume a lot has changed, but that's not really the case. Now, whether you think that's a good thing or not, here's what I'll say. The previous Strike was a fantastic racket, and there were definitely some things that were getting a little bit dated with it, but I'm glad that they kept the core identity of the Strike the same. It's a pretty unique racket in the industry because yes, it's a control racket before anything else, but it's got quite a bit of other stuff going for it, and we're gonna get into all of that in a second. But anyways, in terms of specs, it is very, very similar. It still weighs 305 grams with a 98 square inch head size, and then it has an undulating 21 to 23 back to 21 millimeter beam. The flex has gone down a bit. This last one I tested at 64 RA strung, and the new one was 62 RA. And the very interesting thing is that they kept the swing weight the same. These both swung at around 333 on our Bayarder Tune Pro. One of the first changes you'll see if you look around the frame is the FSI control tech instead of the FSI power tech that was on the previous one. I've seen some marketing jargon saying that this means the string bed got denser, but honestly I've stared at these for quite a while and I really can't tell a difference, and there's not much of a difference on court either. Now the biggest change is the introduction of NF2 Tech flax inserts in the layup. Layup technology changes aren't the easiest to spot and they're kind of tough to market, but they can have a massive effect on racket playability, and that's definitely the case here. So let's start with feel. By far the biggest difference coming from the previous Strike is in feel, and it kind of all comes down to those NF2 Tech flax inserts. You've heard me talk about these before with the Aero line, and I pretty much only had good things to say. They massively improved the feel on the 98 and especially on the 100, and that's 100% the case on the new Strike as well. The most dated thing on the previous Strike was definitely the feel. It's not that it was bad, but this racket came out before the industry started trending back to softer and better feeling layups. Directly comparing the last one and this one, the previous one has a way more rigid response. Again, it's not bad, but it can be a little bit more jarring. The new one maybe feels a touch more hollow on contact, but in general, it's a massive improvement. It feels like the stiffness has dropped more than just 2 points, and those flax inserts do a very good job of making the racket feel more plush without overly muting it or taking away from that classic Strike crispness. That's one of the things I've always loved about the Strike. Unlike a lot of other control rackets, Babolat isn't totally mushioning up the feel on contact here. Yes, it has lost a bit of that crisp response, but I think they've nailed the ratio of crisp to plush here, and as you can imagine, that makes the racket significantly more comfortable. I personally didn't have issues with discomfort on the previous one, but that jarring feel was definitely an issue for some people. I don't think that will be the case here. Now, another one of the things we've seen with control rackets over the last several years is that these layup technologies are also turning into stabilization technologies in order to keep the swing weights lower and therefore more user-friendly. We see this on the Blade with 45 braid and on the Percept with stiff racket face design. While the NF2 Tech flax definitely feel like they stabilize the racket a little bit, but it's much less significant than those technologies. There isn't that artificially stable feel, and that helps make the sweet spot a little bit sweeter, but in order to keep the frame adequately stable, they had to keep the swing weight high, hence the 333 strung. That takes away from some user friendliness for sure, but I'm fine with this because high swing weights just make sense on control rackets, and because that high swing weight is a big reason for why the Pure Strike has such great power. This might be a controversial opinion, but I think power is the most impressive characteristic on the Pure Strike. Now obviously this is a control racket, so its control is still a little bit better than its power, but what I mean by that is that its power is extremely high compared to other rackets in this category, like the Blade, the Percept, the Prestige, the Pro Staff. or other control rackets like that. That's in large part due to this higher swing weight. When you swing fast with a full stroke, you can absolutely launch the ball. The fact that these control rackets have low swing weights now is great for user friendliness, but no amount of stabilization tech can match the super solid feel of straight up mass behind the ball. Now that high swing weight is great, but it's not enough to make me say that's the reason this has so much more power than its competition, because you can always add weight to a racket. The other big thing here is the shape and beam design, which is definitely not traditional for a control racket. For one, the beam isn't constant. Bringing it up to 23 millimeters in the lower hoop means that it's a lot more sturdy on contact. You don't feel the same uniform noodly flex the way you do on something like a Gravity or a Percept, and that means the ball loses less energy during pocketing. With that said, the beam is still pretty thin even at that thickest point, so you still feel the flex, which is why you get such a unique blend of great control and power. That's really what has made the Strike such a one-of-a-kind racket, and when I say I'm happy that Babolat kept its identity, that's what I'm talking about. It would have been really easy for Babolat to completely change up the Strike and go for a constant beam, super soft, classic control racket, and that would have generated a lot of hype for sure, but that's not what makes the Strike special. Plus we got the 97 for that. That's going to be a fun review because we all saw where I put it in the tier list. Of course, this Strike is softer than the last one, and because it's noticeably more plush on impact, it has lost a little bit of power, but as you can imagine, that has helped a lot with its control. So as much as power is what I'm most impressed with on the Pure Strike, there's no denying this is a control racket, and it's by far Babolat's most controlled line. I say line because the Strike 1619 is not as controlled as the 1820 or the 97, but that kind of goes without saying, and we'll be reviewing those soon. But yes, compared to the Aero and the Pure Drive, the Strike has a more consistent launch, and the feel and beam flex is more along the lines of what you're going to get with traditional control rackets. Compared to the last one, like I said, you have a better connection to the ball here, and that longer dwell time means you have more of an ability to guide it where you want to place it during contact. These updates have just brought it a little bit closer to what you want if you're looking for that traditional control, but because it has kept a lot of that signature Strike crispness, it's not like it's a huge step away from the last one. Now I will say, when a racket has a high swing weight like this, it's definitely more difficult to control. That's part of the reason why a lot of these companies have been spending so much R&D on those low swing weight stabilization technologies. It just helps to simplify your control racket. You do have to really focus on your footwork and your timing and swing fast and full. Good clean contact doesn't come as easily as on those rackets, but to me, that's what gives it a slightly more pro control feel. When a racket has good control and a high swing weight like this, you get a very consistent and solid feel when you're hitting it right. The racket isn't going to get pushed around because there is more mass up there, and then when you do go for a big shot where you need that control, it stays a little bit more sturdy on impact, which is what I associate with that pro feel. It's similar to what you'll get with the Gravity Pro, or for you more techie people, the Blade Pro H22. Those two rackets have really high swing weights, and those are kind of the epitome of pro control rackets these days. That solid feel was great from the baseline, but it's even more apparent once you get to the net. That's where that swing weight stability really shines. This thing was super solid for volleys. Now I do just want to touch on this string bed for a second because I really couldn't tell a difference between this one and the last one, but it is a very consistent string bed, which isn't always the case for Babolat rackets. As you can see, it's definitely not the densest 16x19 string pattern out there, but it doesn't have any wildness to it, and I'd put it kind of middle of the range in terms of launch angle for control rackets with a similar spec. Now, spin potential is determined by a number of things, string pattern density being one of them, and because I just said it's pretty standard for a 16x19 control racket, it's not going to be crazy spinny, but it's also not going to limit you. There are two other very crucial things for spin though, racket head speed and mass behind the ball. Like I said, there's plenty of weight behind the ball here, but I did sometimes struggle to generate super fast racket head speed because the swing weight is so high. If you want to swing it quickly through contact, you got to be super on top of your game and have a pretty strong arm. And the difference between this 1619 and another high swing weight racket like the Gravity Pro is that you have to use spin to control this thing. With an 1820, you can sometimes get away with no spin because the ball will probably fall between the lines anyway, but with the 1619, it's in their nature to be a little bit more launchy, so you have to tap into that spin, and yes, that's a little bit more difficult with a high swing weight. You'll see with a lot of the clips here, I'm doing that classic Nadal whippy follow through, and that's kind of a telltale sign that I'm struggling to bring the racket face through contact. Part of me does wish that stock swing weight was a little bit lower, but a higher swing weight's actually going to work better for those of you with a strong arm because high swing weight, fast, powerful technique, those two things are complementary, which is why you see so many pros using high swing weights. So if you are a really high level player, you can kind of ignore what I just said, Plus, the Pure Strike is a little bit stiffer than other control rackets, so naturally it generates a bit more spin. I know I said this one is plusher than the previous one, but I didn't notice a drop off in spin, and if there was one, it's negligible. So you've probably figured it out by now, considering the amount of times I've used the word pro in this review, but this is definitely a racket geared toward advanced players. Also, a little side note, I only mentioned the Gravity Pro like once or twice, which is really impressive for me, so it seems like things are on the up for 2024. But yeah, this is definitely more for advanced players who want a really solid stick that is pretty darn good in every category. The fact that feel has gotten better is a super solid improvement and definitely worth the switch, but it also means you're not going to be changing to a wildly different racket if you are coming from the previous one. I would caution against the Strike if you don't consider yourself at least a 4.0 level player. This really comes into its own for big hitters, but if you are one of those, you can pop off any type of shot with this thing. Now, I'm also very excited about this racket because it's going to make for some very fun comparisons to other frames. For one, the whole beam profile is pretty similar to the Radical MP. Without getting too much into it, I do think I prefer the feel on the Strike, but it would be really cool to string those two rackets up the same way and do a sort of head-to-head comparison. Maybe even weighting up the Radical to the Strike spec would be a fun little video concept. Also, there's another racket that I kept thinking about during this playtest, and that's the Percept 97. The fact that Yonex stiffened it up pretty substantially means that it's kind of similar to the Strike in that they're two control rackets with pretty crisp feels. I think it's worth a comparison. I'm a huge fan of that crispness on my control rackets, so I think I would have a ton of fun comparing them more directly, and I think I could end up switching to one of them. When I was testing the Strike, I played with my normal hitting partner and with Jonas from Tennis Nerd, and they both said, wow, you're playing really well with this thing, you should consider a switch, and I kind of agree as long as I can handle that slightly higher swing weight. But that's a conversation for another video. For now though, that is going to be the end of the video, but don't worry, reviews are not stopping. We're gonna have something cool next week. I'm not sure what quite yet. But anyways, the Strike is awesome, and remember that if you do want to demo it, you can come visit us in store, or you can check it out online at racketsandrunners.ca.